So you're trying to make it a little bit easier, a little quicker for all of us. And yeah, that'd be great. So, well, without any further ado, we should probably get this going. So, Tom, off to you. And is your mic okay?
Is my mic okay?
No.
It's better? Okay. Should I just talk like, you know what? How about I just hold the thing? It's like, I'm not really big, it's just a really small mic. Can you guys hear that all right? No? Yeah. So, I guess if you guys want to hear me double miking, I can hold that one, or can you all hear me okay? Not whether you can understand me okay, that's a whole nother thing. All right, just in case I need some support. All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Greg. That was very kind of you, those words. He is correct. I really do love hugging trees. I never have had the opportunity to really get up close and personal with the upper canopy of a tree before, but I had my opportunity in September 2023, and my notes have also disappeared. 1 second. All right, and we're back. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming out here. I really didn't expect so many people to come out and listen to me talking about a crash that I had a few months ago. But here we all are here now. I was approached by Jeremy actually a few months ago to give this talk because him and quite a few other people, surprisingly, had got on to me after I wrote a crash report about how much they liked my report. Now, I guess it's pretty easy to have a really good report when there aren't a lot of other reports being posted. So I guess I'll take the I'll take the wins that I can get. But yeah, I guess on that, can I see a show of hands tonight? Who wrote a public crash report on the last crash they had, or a crash they had? I'm seeing one, two, seeing maybe 25% of the room. So on the last crash you had, did you write a report? So, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we might not write a report. We don't have time, we forget, maybe we feel unsure about how to write it, or maybe we feel embarrassed about it. There are a whole bunch of reasons. And, I guess it's on us as a community to really try and work through those barriers and all become better at communicating our most embarrassing moments when we're flying, which usually is crashing. Or I'm sure there's probably other embarrassing things that we do when we're flying too. But so yeah, I guess the point of this talk is not really to tell you all do how to do all the things better. I'm not professing to be a expert on any of these things. This is just my experience and what I learned from my experience. So, yeah, if we can rip on to the next slide there, Jeremy. So, I guess a more informal title for this would be A Brief Lesson on How to Hug Trees by Tom Kiddo. That's me with my friendly arborist up the tree, 30 meters up. And yeah, we're going to go through the events that led to that photo. Like any incident, it's always a chain of events, or as my dad, who was a commercial pilot, would have said, it's always incidents always come from a bunch of windows lining up. It's never one thing. So I guess the thing we have to look at in the context of avoiding our accidents is just how we break that chain, and we'll go through a little bit of that. So I guess what I'm going to be roughly covering here, I'm going to be ad-libbing a bit because I prepared a lot of this presentation on the train here. So first up, we're going to be going through, the factors that caused the windows that lined up to cause my accident. And, we're going to talk about fitness to fly. We're going to talk about gear setup, complacency, SIV and wing handling, tree landing and tree etiquette, as I like to think about it. and also reporting and how to write a winning crash report. Maybe the only thing I can profess to be an expert in. So anyway, onwards and upwards. So first up, a little bit about myself. I don't really get that much of an opportunity to have a captive audience that I can force a bit of my paragliding stories on. So here we are. Got 20 of you now. Yeah, I've been flying for about 4 years. I'm from a family of pilots, but I've been flying as a private pilot for about 8, and I have about 250 hours. In that 250 hours, I've not, I guess I wouldn't have, I haven't got a lot of hours, but I have done a lot of different types of flying in a lot of different places. I've flown in New Zealand, Australia, through Europe, and through North America. I've done uh, quite a lot of ski launch flying here, which that one wasn't going so well. But also, I competed in the X Red Rocks in September last year, actually only 3 weeks after my crash. And also do a lot of flying around Pemberton. Some of you might recognise that as being just along towards Copper Dome there, or Copper Mound. So I guess a little bit about the lead up to this crash, which I guess is a little bit important. I guess give some context. I've in the 4 years I've been flying, I've had a bit of success and personal success in it, and been really happy with how I was going. In 2022, had a really good season, broke a bunch of personal bests. And going back through my messages, I actually at that point in 2022 had started to reach out to my mentors in paragliding and ask the question. Um, anyway, on to the next one, Jeremy. So let's fast forward to the day of the crash. I think it was in mid-September sometime. And let's go through some of the windows that lined up. I guess the first one we can talk about is the decision to fly on that day. What is your fitness to fly? I guess this is all stuff we all know. But when I was writing this slide, I did a couple of quick searches and did a little bit of reading into this. And, I'm sure most of you are aware, I guess subjectively, that you don't react as fast when you're fatigued or when you're hungover. But some numbers are pretty shocking. You're 20% slower if you've had less than 6 hours sleep in your reaction times, not to mention your decision making time. And if you're hungover, that compounds it. If you're hungover, your reaction times and your decision making processes are the same as if you were driving over the limit, or if you're over the safe driving limit with alcohol. So there's a lot in that. I certainly knew that I was supposed to be paying attention to that stuff. Here's a copy of a pre-flight checklist that I made for myself when I first started flying, and this sort of came from my general aviation background. You can see it's incredibly detailed. And another thing you might notice is there's no check boxes there. There's no boxes checked. I stopped using these checklists probably in my second or third year. Again, this is probably going to come down to you're probably going to hear the word complacency a lot in this talk. But yeah, on fitness to fly, um, you know, talking about I remember this from general aviation, the acronym I'm safe. Again, we all know it, but maybe we need to remind ourselves about it a bit more. So it's illness, medication, stress, alcohol and drugs, fatigue, and have you eaten? Have you drunk enough? Have you had the right nutrition? It all makes a massive difference when things start going awry. We've all flown when we've been hungover or had no sleep or whatever, and a lot of us have probably got away with it, but sometimes you don't. And this day was that day for me. So anyway, I knew what I was supposed to do, and of course, the night before, I definitely, made sure I paid attention to getting all the correct sleep and stuff. And luckily, move to the next one. Luckily, I actually kept a pretty detailed diary, and this is a photo of my diary from that weekend. So I've got really messy writing, so I'll just explain this a little bit. Ocean Alley is a stoner rock band from Australia, and they were playing in Stanley Park on Friday night. So I went to that with a bunch of friends. Definitely didn't drink anything, and then hug and tug dinner. Now that's not really what it sounds like. Yeah, they're nicknames of two of my friends. But anyway, take that, take that as you please. And then, unsurprisingly, I've also planned to go paragliding the very next day. So we can see a pretty massive red flag in hindsight here, and I should have seen it at the time and really thought about that. Was Saturday really a day for me to go flying after I'd gone and had an absolute rip snorter of a night at a dinner party, fun dinner party, and a Stone Rock concert? So yeah, probably not a great idea. But anyway, here we are. So next slide on. Let's talk a little bit about gear setup. So on the day of the crash, I was trying a bunch of new stuff out. So I was 3 weeks out from the X Red Rocks. Bought myself a new wing. It was the Nova Mentor 7 Light something. And I'd flown it a bit, but I hadn't done an SIV on it. And I probably had about 15, 20 hours on it at this point. I also had a new harness that I was just getting used to. And I'd also just bought a new radio. And when I ordered the radio, I'd forgotten to order a speaker mic, which I had on my previous one. And as a result, I had to change my radio from where I usually have it. I usually have it sitting on or in my flight deck, and then have the speaker mic on my riser. Now, there's a million different ways to skin this cat, but on the day, my partner and I both had the same new radio, and we were having trouble with getting the frequencies to change for some reason. We didn't bring the manual with us, so yeah, didn't we were running on a different frequency. We were talking to each other, but we weren't on 146415. And I had this on my shoulder, so it was in an unusual position. Now, all of those things in isolation are probably pretty minor. I'm sure everyone's taken their hand off the controls at some point in their career, but at some point in their flying career. But I think it was just another one of those windows lining up. Now, there was something else I was going to mention about this too. Oh, yeah, the other thing about the radio, so not being on the right frequency, probably also would have been quite helpful because Bev very kindly was yelling to me, hands up, when I had full stalled my wing. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. One other thing you might notice here. I've got a mosquito head net on. I don't usually wear that while I'm flying, but I did have it in my gear, and it was quite helpful. Yeah, there was a hornet's nest at the bottom of this tree, and unfortunately, my good friends Adam and Kalina, shout out to them, who came to rescue me straight afterwards. Happened to find that hornet's nest and also send a bunch of hornets up my way. So it wasn't for the mosquitoes; that was for the hornets. But yeah, one other thing, if for those who are observant here, actually might notice is that's not a tiny little branch. That's actually the rope that I tied myself off with, which also not the best idea in the world, but we'll cover that later. Anyway, enough of that embarrassing photo. Let's move on. Can you hear everything all right through the? Yeah, it's all good. Any questions or?
So far, they're just listening.
Just listening? Great. I like it. Silence. So complacency. Yeah, this is a great photo of Bev and the others. Yeah, I really like this. So this photo was actually taken just before, I think, on the ride up to the launch before we crashed. Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch in this to unpack. But really, I think as paragliders, we probably, having come from a general aviation background, I think we're a little bit more complacent about it generally than other forms of aviation, and I think maybe that's partly because it's just sometimes paragliders go a lot slower. When you do hit crash into the ground, you're not an instant fatality. When your stall speed is 75 kilometers an hour in an aeroplane, it's there's a lot more motivation to be on point. I guess also, paragliders, when everything's going well, are literally the easiest thing in the world to fly. They don't require active piloting like every other aircraft does. So I think complacency is kind of built into built into these things, and it's very easy to do, in my opinion. Some of you may not agree, but yeah, that's sort of what I've come to with it. Excuse me, I'm just going to have some dinner. Um, so yeah, that particular day, what did we have going on? So I was out with some friends. I was training for the X Red Rocks, and basically my day was all about hiking up the hill as fast as I could. It was there was no lift. No one was going cross country. It was difficult to stay up until quite late in the afternoon. So there was no flying objective. We were just there to dick around. So the other part of it was I was been helping some other people with their own flying and helping some other people with their thermaling skills and launching and landing skills. So I guess a lot of my focus in the flying was not on myself but on others. I guess a bit of that comes from, again, complacency. I'd probably, in hindsight as well, um, my mindset around the risk, around the general risks in paragliding was probably altered due to my expectations of the upcoming race. And, I can remember actually only probably a couple of weeks before this, I can remember Peter Spear actually saying pretty much exactly that thing to me. So, these races make you do some silly things, and not even during the race, it turns out. So, I guess the other factor here, as I've jammed in under complacency, is weather. So, on that particular day, the weather was changing. The first couple of flights we had, you could maintain and stay up, but it was incredibly difficult. And there's a lot of scratching involved, and it was incredibly weak. There were no strong thermals, there was nothing sharp, but yeah, had to really work at it. So, final flight comes around, and yeah, it was definitely changing. There was nice lift, and right before the crash, my partner took off, and she took off straight into a thermal in front of launch, and she'd been struggling with thermaling a bit, and she absolutely nailed it on this particular flight. She went up like a homesick angel, and yeah, she was going great. So I was stoked for her. I took off shortly after her, and I was busy watching her up at about 850 meters while I did the first couple of S turns in front of launch and just a little bit to the right. I'm sure you're all probably familiar with Woodside. There's a bit of a corner in the clear cut off to the right where there's usually a little thermal kicking off. So I was sort of S turning around there. I think I'd done 2 turns, and I was just turning around from that corner in the cut block, about 50 meters to the right of launch or 100 meters to the right of launch. And I was busy watching her, and she was doing so well that I took my hand off the brake. I didn't put it into one. I didn't put both brakes into one hand, and I reached for my radio in the new position and basically keyed the mic to make a radio call to her saying, "Yeah, nice work, George. You're nailing it." And right at that point, I felt the A line start to slacken. Right when I was keying the mic, I looked up, and the nose was tucking under already, and I go, "Ah, shit." I only have one brake in my hands, in a hand. So I was like, well, I have to let this go. So it frontaled and went behind me, shot forward, and while it was shooting forward, I grabbed for the other brake, and must have braked unevenly, which then caused it to sort of shoot asymmetrically and collapse asymmetrically. And then basically from there, I had a little bit of a pendulum through and pumped it out. And somehow from that asymmetric, managed to take it into a parachutal stall. Now, I can remember at this point looking up at the wing. And at this point as well, I think what had happened is I'd flown a bit further back from the front of the ridgeline where everyone sort of soars, and I'd got into this sort of gnarly little flat rotary zone behind. Whether I was on the back of a thermal or whether there was a bit of a gust of wind coming up, I'm not 100% sure. But looking at the Zachometer, wind meter, there were some strong thermic gusts coming through. So, yeah, basically, I can remember looking up at the wing and seeing it completely inflated and looking like it was flying fine and feeling like I was still sinking like crazy and going, I can remember thinking, what the hell's going on here? Why is this thing not going forward? God damn it. So, anyway, the right thing to do probably would have been to push speed bar if I was in fact in parachutal and get out of it. However, the call I made at the time, and you can probably move it on from here, Jeremy. SIV wing handling. Um, what I probably should have done was push the speed bar. What I ended up doing was hitting the brakes in the spur of the moment. And I think what happened there is I took it from parachutal to full stall. Now, we'll cover this a little bit later, but I talked to everyone who was around and saw the crash at the time. And, you know, the comment that was made that I had my hands actually quite low and had them sustained quite low for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Now I know time dilates a little bit and condenses up depending on what perspective you have. But yeah, at this point, I believe Bev was on the radio saying hands up, hands up. I was blissfully ignorant at this point, looking down at the trees, going, "Oh boy, they're close." And basically thinking about how I was going to go into the trees. So I kept the wing fully stalled.
How high
and-
were you when the event started?
So that's a great question. How high was I when it first started? So, you know what? I probably should have looked this up on my flight log, or even had a copy of my flight log up here. Yeah, so I'd say I was probably about 20 to 40 meters above. What would you say, Bev? How high was I when you saw me full stalling?
Not high enough by the time.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I'd say 20 to 30 meters. Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of time. By the time I'd burned, by the time I'd frontaled and then had that asymmetric and then got that out and I was in parachutal, I was probably too low at that point to get out of it. I was in this sort of flat spot behind Woodside, behind the ridge there at Woodside, just off to the right of launch. And yeah, so anyway, I go. One thing I would love to know, and this is something that I always try and train myself on whenever I'm doing maneuvers, is tuck the old legs of the pod in. I'd love to know if I actually did that. I have seen a number of pilots come unstuck a bit by keeping their legs out in the pod and basically getting twisted up as a result. So I guess it wasn't an issue for me here. I didn't spin or I didn't have any rotation, but great thing to remember. Um, Oh, and I guess the other thing I would just mention here is, yeah, it is just a high B I'm flying, but it does fly a lot differently to the buzz I was on for 2 or 3 years. The tip stall pretty easy, surprisingly easily actually for a high B. I've flown a few high Bs, and this particular one really loves to drop a tip back. So, yeah, I guess on to the next one if you want, Jeremy. I guess any questions so far, anyone? No? Right on. So how I like to land in trees. So yeah, as I mentioned before, I went in with the wing stalled. I looked down and swiftly by the search and rescue team a whole bunch of bears. So cheers, George. Um, So yeah. Anyway, one thing that I did do. Now I'm not going to tell you how to land in a tree best. I happened to be full stalled, and it happened to be a very nice landing. I landed in between trunks, and I had no scratches or bruises on me, and my wing overall had one single 5 mm tear in it, and it was completely in trim still, and no stains either. So I don't know whether that was part of it. I did go in quite slowly because I was just sort of going down vertically, I guess, as opposed to going into a trunk like where I guess if you were deciding to fly into the trees, you'd probably aim at a trunk, and I imagine your wing would go over the front, and you'd hit a lot faster, and things would be maybe a bit messier. But yeah, I was quite fortunate in that respect. So anyway, on to the next one. So here I am in the trees. And I guess the first thing I did is I climbed up a little bit to unload the wing, and I secured myself. And at this point, Artem and Kalina, bless their souls, were running down and got hammered by the hornets. And then had the good grace to tell me it wasn't Christmas time yet. So little hanging stuff on the tree joke there for you. So yeah, here I am sitting in this tree. This is the view that I had looking down. Actually, this one's taken a little bit later. You can see the arborist on his way up there. But yeah, there are a lot of good branches around. But one thing that was very surprising in this, and I surprised myself with a little bit, was from this perspective, distance and depth was very distorted. I'm looking at people here and going, I'm a surveyor by profession. Like I do distances, and we, practice estimating distance a lot. Like it is quite difficult when you're dealing with trees that they're very uniform and have very few features to determine how high you are. So I'm standing here. Artem and Kalina are standing off the back here at this point, and um, I'm talking to them and they're saying, do not try climb down. And I'm like, well, of course I'm not going to try climb down. That's what everyone tells you not to do. But I'm looking down and I'm going, man, it sure looks like there's a lot of branches going down there. Like, I'm sure I'd probably be able to make it down, but like, I'm not going to do it, but I'm pretty sure I could if I had to. Now, of course, I was lucky enough to have, to crash 100 meters away from Woodside Launch where there were lots of people and right beside a road that search and rescue could come up to. But ultimately, I can see how, somebody who lands in a tree in the middle of nowhere and doesn't have all the tree, the self rescue kit is going to look down at this view and go, oh, you know what? It looks like this branch is going all the way to the bottom almost, or maybe at least to a couple of meters from the end. Uh-uh. Probably 2 meters down from where I was, or 3 meters down from where I was. All these other branches you can see here, they were all brittle as you could break them off with your hand. And then from there, it was another 15 or 20 meters down to the ground. So you can just imagine if you started climbing down and started putting weight on these branches, and you've got your hands on good branches, and all of a sudden they start breaking, now you're cooked. So, yeah, it's, I guess this is all about, everyone knows this. Again, I'm not telling anyone anything new here, but don't climb down. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, this is Georgie took this photo. It is a little bit distorted because I think it's a wide angle camera to be able to get the whole thing in, or a wide angle iPhone. But yeah, you can just see there, like there's a lot of big trees. I actually understand that this tree might have been pre-loved by someone in this audience, but yeah, pre-owned, pre-loved. We are tree huggers in this organization, aren't we? So I'm going to go with love. So anyway, let's move onwards. Yeah, so I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to SAR. This is the crew that came and rescued me. So I crashed at 5 p.m. and they were there within half an hour. They had people starting to set up at the bottom. And I was out of the tree and taking this photo in less than 2 hours. So You know, yeah, we really owe a lot to these guys. They're incredibly professional, and yeah, I've got nothing but good things to say about them. Particularly considering over half of them were doing it for absolutely nothing. I think there were some contractors in there. Yeah, and also I think there was some other incidents on. And they decided to come to me, and they sounded pretty stoked about the whole rescue thing too. There's like a nice sunset. They were getting to like send people up trees and set up pulleys and stuff. They were pretty stoked about it.
The search and rescue team were notified.
So, I'm so glad you asked that. Actually, I completely forgot about that bit. Yeah. So, search and rescue. This is actually this is a bit of a tricky one because, well, we obviously didn't need to use an inReach, but
You did.
I don't know if you've.
reach. Yeah, oh, you
I had an inReach with me, but I didn't need to use it because we were in reception. Actually, when I landed in the tree, you know, everyone's like, "Oh, great work reporting on this," which I think was one of the first photos, and yeah, kind of had to own it from there. And you wouldn't believe it, but I actually got a few phone calls while I was up the tree too. The very first phone call actually was from Rod Frew to pass on some wise advice. So yeah, thanks very much, Rod, if you're there on the camera. Much appreciated. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all the good tips. So yeah, I got calls from from a few people and messages. So I was quite occupied there fielding all the PR. What three wording or search and rescue or something? I wouldn't expect you to. Basically, what three words is it's like Google Maps. It's just an app on your phone. But the difference is rather than having addresses, what they've done is they've divided the entire world into 3 meter by 3 meter blocks, and they've given every one of those blocks a unique name. And it's just three random words. So it might be like blue sky powder. So you say to 911, I'm at blue sky powder, and they will be able to basically pinpoint within 3 meters exactly where you are in the world.
That's actually funny. Just that start here, they told us not to use that.
That's interesting. Really? Okay, so just to pass on what Greg said there, and I actually have heard there's a bit of consternation about this. So 911 really loved it, but search and rescue didn't love it so much, is what Greg's saying. We just had a talk. Yeah, so let long could be an option. Yeah, ultimately getting onto SAR directly would be a great option. But yeah, what worked for us was the what three words thing, but SAR doesn't like it. Just remember that. The most reliable thing might be doing coordinates, but I do know that some people find coordinates confusing. So yeah, I guess have a system, know it, and make sure you can communicate it. But in places where
Location to your cell phone.
yes, that's correct.
Oh, and it's kick also
Yeah, it's Nash, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Cam. Sorry, Cam. So yeah, Cam's just saying, yeah, well, they can triangulate your phone position. Yeah, they can do that. Maybe they'll be able to do that for you. Tom.
Would it help to fit in your
That's a great question, and I've heard a few. Man, I've heard so many different versions of this. Talk to guys down in the Red Rocks, and they're telling war stories about how how the what do you call it, Garmin Rescue Center or whatever it's called, who responds to the inReach things, don't always take into account your insurance stuff. They they might end up screwing around even longer than just calling 911. So. I guess, the floor is open here, really. I don't have the answer for this of what the best thing to do is. Greg, what did SAR say the best thing to do was? They said hit your inReach.
They want they,
Right.
but it's also you don't call them.
No.
You're doing like a call. Okay, then there's
Yeah. So
has to be successful, right?
Yes.
Can our Garmin
Mhm.
watch the SOS with our Garmin watches without.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Activate something. You're communicating on your phone and everything. That can all get sorted out and ringing.
yeah.
Eventually, if you're in a situation potentially some, or you're in a situation where you're injured, you don't know if you
Yeah, that you can pass on information that would give Latin long, you're likely to just punch the button, get that over with, and that system can work in the background. Eventually, it'll cross over.
Yeah, for sure. In our situation, calling 911 worked. There was a bit of a stuff around with the address, and I'm told that that is quite often the issue with 911. Maybe just giving them coordinates is the best way to do it, and they can pass that on to SAR, and apparently that's what they want. If they know the general locality, if there are any errors with the coordinates, like you didn't put a negative